Welcome to Asake Online. My name is Brighton. This is Know Your Right, a show that seeks to look at the Zimbabwean Constitution as well as the Bill of Rights, tackling the issue of the public hearings in Zimbabwe. But today on the show, I'm joined by Dr. Pedzisai Ruhanya to discuss more about media freedoms in Zimbabwe as well as the freedom of expression. Doc, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brighton.
I'm great, Doc. Let's talk about the media freedoms in Zimbabwe and freedom of expression in Zimbabwe. Is there freedom of expression in Zimbabwe?
Yes, it is there. There is freedom of expression in Zimbabwe. In terms of the Constitution of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Section 61 and Section 62 provides for freedom, but also goes to provide for freedom of the media, freedom of broadcasting, freedom to own newspapers, freedom to disseminate information. So yes, it is there in terms of the Constitution, but the disparity is provided in the Constitution and what happens on the ground. The de jure aspect is there in terms of Section 61 and Section 62, but whereas Section 61, Section 62, including Section 57, provide for the de jure, for the legal framework, for the freedom of expression. 61.5 has limitations on the exercise of that right. That the exercise of freedom of expression is not a blank check. It has its limitations, and these limitations are provided for in the Constitution in terms of Section 61.5, but also Section 86 and Section 87 of the Constitution provides the limitations in the exercise of freedom of expression. And some of the limitations are of violence, advocates of hatred, malicious injury of a person's reputation, and unwarranted breach of privacy. What this means is that freedom of expression, it is provided in terms of the law, has reached what we call norms of international law, or general practices across the world, not only in Zimbabwe. The limitations that are placed on freedom of expression are not peculiar to Zimbabwe, but you find them in most jurisdictions, in most African countries, in most European countries, even in American jurisdiction, that it has limitations. It has not reached a peremptory norm or what juice cogents that is also in the law. It limitations. Those on in Section 86 limitations must be just in a democratic society.
Right, Doc, if we're to look at the freedom of media freedom in Zimbabwe in the era of Robert Mugabe as compared to now in the new dispensation, would you say has there been any changes there in terms of media freedoms in Zimbabwe?
I wouldn't say there are any changes. You must understand that what changed was the leadership of President Mugabe, but the systems under which Zimbabwe operates has not changed. There's a democratic breakthrough, if you want. There has not been a proper democratic transition, and because we remain in what I would call the gray zone of the transition, it therefore means that there has not been change. That's why we have journalists like Hope Wachmono being arrested for exposing corruption, being arrested for speaking out his mind, for his investigative journalism. These are things that we used to see during the Mugabe period. And this tells you that what has changed is the leader has changed from President Mugabe to President Mnangagwa, but the institutional governance framework under which the system in Zimbabwe operates hasn't changed. We still have the same players, we still have the same vilification of the media, we still have the same arrest of the media. So I would say we have repetition without change.
But now with the repeal of the IPA, what does it mean to media in Zimbabwe?
It means nothing, because that's why we have in police custody. There's nothing that has changed, like I said. If you go and look at the provisions of IPA in terms of media regulation and the provision of the new constitution, freedom of the new law, freedom of information, there's nothing that has changed fundamentally. But you should also understand that there's a relationship between media and democracy. It is not possible to have a free media in a non-democratic society, or to have a democratic society without a free media. So you must have a democratic society and a free media. There is a strong interplay between media and democracy. And that media and democracy must exist in an environment which respects the exercise of civil and political liberties. So if we agree that we do not have a democratic polity, we cannot therefore say that we have a democratic media, because we cannot have a democratic media in an undemocratic polity. It is not possible. We have still a lot of work to do to align what the Constitution says and what the government practices. So there's a disjuncture between the de jure provisions in the Constitution and the de facto practices of those that are in power. That is where the problem is. But in terms of our constitutional architecture, you can't fault Zimbabwe on what is provided in the Constitution of the Republic, which is the supreme law of the land. In terms of Section 61, Section 62, but also even the limitations that are put on freedom of expression in Section 61.5 and Section 87 and Section 86. They are purely democratic because the role of the media is not, for instance, to incite hate, to incite tribalism, to incite ethnicity, to incite violence, to incite hate. I would give you an example. During the Rwanda genocide in 1994, there was a radio called RMTC, radio television, which incited against the Tutsi minority by the Hutus, leading to over 800,000 people dead, where citizens were called the cockroaches. Surely that cannot be the role of a media in a democratic society. So the limits are there in the Constitution, they are arguably democratic.
But now, Doc, let's look at the issue of Zimbabwe. 40 years into independence, we still have one television station, ZB. What does it mean to us? What does it say about our democracy as a country? 40 years into independence, but we still have one television station. What does it mean in terms of also liberalizing and opening up airwaves in Zimbabwe?
It speaks for itself. It means that we are not moving forward. If you look at our neighbors, South Africa got independence in 1994. But look at the radio stations in South Africa. Look at the television stations in South Africa. For instance, when there is a rally of the ANC and the EFF, the role of the public broadcaster in SABC is to moderate, to say, at what point are we broadcasting the ANC rally? And at what point are we allocating time for EFF? But in Zimbabwe, there's nothing like that. Each time you see the opposition appearing on television, they are being maligned, they are being degraded, they are being accused of several things. For instance, let's go for instance, yesterday, the press statement, media conference by the former Minister of Finance, Patrick Chinamasa, he was virtually inciting violence. And the violence that former Minister Chinamasa was inciting is contrary to Section 61.5. The limitations that are placed on media freedom were not being observed. And it is the role of you guys in the media to make sure that when politicians or when people like myself speak, we must not incite citizens to violence. When the former minister said that an organization like the Movement for Democratic Change, which was part of the inclusive government, which controls local opposition, which is supported by millions of Zimbabwe, is a terrorist organization. You are inciting public violence against office bearers of that political party. Because when you label a legitimate political party as a terrorist organization, it means the organs of the state, the security apparatus, must make sure that those terrorists are arrested. So is he telling us all those councillors, all those MPs are terrorists? If it is a terrorist organization, it means the MPC is run by a terrorist. That's what. So the media is not supposed to broadcast such kind of propaganda because it leads to violence, it leads to national instability, and our country doesn't need that. And it is the role of the media not to propagate such kind of blatant provisions because they violate Section 87 and Section 86, but also Section 61.5, the limitations placed on the exercise of freedom of expression in the Constitution of the Republic of Zimbabwe are democratic. But the practices that happens, this is the role of government, violate
Right
the
now.
spirit of the Constitution.
Now, Doc, let's look at the arrest of Robert Chingona, and as well that on Saturday, Blessed Mhlanga was also arrested for Newsday. Now, what does this say about the media being the fourth estate, being the part, playing the part of the watchdog of the executive? Now, expose corruption in Zimbabwe, and people are saying, and being the watchdog of society. When Doc?
The media, it is it is the agenda, and it advocates for political ideas and political issues. That of will, in my view, in my humble submission, is a violation of his right to freedom of expression, is a violation of the Constitution of the Republic. The Constitution that is ZANU-PF, MDC, and every one of us as citizens agreed to when it was agreed to it in 20. Arguably, I think that took place against Hopewell, violates its fundamental civil and political liberties as provided not only relative to the issue of freedom of expression, but also in terms of the Bill of Rights, Chapter 4 of the Constitution. So I think, while I appreciate that this is the case before the court, I would humbly, in general, submit that these practices are not different from not only Mugabe's practices, but they are not different from the regime of Ian Smith's practices. And ZANU-PF as a liberation movement, as a liberation party, ZAPU and ZANU must know these things, that these things happened to them during the liberation struggle in the 60s. ZANU had its own newspapers, had its own publications. ZAPU had its own newspapers, had its own publications. They had to deal with those Bush radio stations and newspapers because Smith, through the Division Broadcasting Corporation and many other laws, were stifling, were muzzling the liberation forces and the people of Zimbabwe. And it is unfortunate that a liberation movement with that rich history is repeating the tactics of the oppressor. And surely repeating the tactics of the oppressor doesn't take our country forward. It is something that is not expensive. It is not expensive for the government to uphold the Constitution. It is not expensive for the government not to violate freedom of expression. It's very cheap. It doesn't need billions. It doesn't need money to do the right things, to respect your own laws, to uphold your own laws. But also, as journalists, you guys have an obligation in terms of the Constitution. 1.5. The limitations placed on freedom of expression must also be respected. But the fundamental role is that for the state to uphold the laws of the Republic, to uphold the Constitution, to uphold what is provided in Section 61, Section 62, that freedom of expression must be exercised. The civil and political liberty, that must not be unlimited, because they are arguing that he was inciting violence. I don't want to go into the merits or demerits of the case because it's before the court. Safe to say that I did not see the incitement of violence by Hopewell. I saw the incitement of violence by former Minister Chinamasa, and it's on record. You can pull ZBC, you can go on YouTube, and you see him inciting violence and authorizing supporters of the party to be violent. Surely, this is not lawful. Surely, this is not in line with what we expect from a party in government. Citizens of all political affiliations. When you are in government, you are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Precisely the meaning of govern in the way. And for a former minister, a lawyer for that matter, a member of the Zimbabwe Law Society, to go public to incite violence and to label a legitimate political party as a terrorist organization, meaning that holders.
Let's look at the issue of reforms. There's much talk about media reforms in Zimbabwe. What to be done now when it comes to media reforms in Zimbabwe?
There is not much that needs to be done. The government simply has to implement the provisions of the Constitution in both theory and practice. Theory in what is provided in the Constitution, and in practice in what they do. They must implement that. I praise those who put those provisions in the Constitution, but liberalize the airwaves. Don't give your friends and radio license only. Give also even Brighton a radio license to broadcast from Bulawayo. Give someone from Cholocho, from Binga, from Zaka, where I come from. Not only people that you think are likable to the government, but even those that it is like. But the most important thing that after people have been given or awarded this license, they must follow the provisions of the law. They must follow the provisions of the Constitution. We must have a government of laws. Our government must be a government of laws. Constitutions are not made for the angels we know, but are made for both the angels we don't know. Today, Mr. Ruhanya may be in government, but tomorrow, Mr. Ruhanya may not be in government. So the way I am treated must be the way I am treated when I am not in government. Therefore, we must not have an animal farm type of implementation of laws, of media laws. Let's have parity, democratic realization of freedom in the Constitution.
There have been specs about the international amidst the coming of 31st July marches and demonstrations. What are they about if the government of Zimbabwe shuts down the internet was seen by the service providers, or the internet today was giving people problems? What does it say about the press as well as access to information if they shut down the internet on the 31st of July?
They've done that before in 2019, in January 2019. And the High Court ruled that what was done by the Minister of State Security was unlawful and was unconstitutional, and that there was no constitutional provision that allows them to do what they did. And that, or those kind of acts, are the ones that shows that we have problems in the implementation of the Constitution, but also that we have freedoms of expression, we have our rights de jure, but we do not have our rights de facto. So we have freedom of expression, but we don't have freedom after expression, or when expressing that freedom, we meet other consequences. But generally, it is our obligation as citizens to always do the right things, so that when the forces of darkness come to accuse Nue or Ruhanya, you are not found on the wrong side of the law. On the highest plane of constitutionality, we must always travel on the highest place of dignity. We must always travel on the highest plane of democratic norm compliance, democratic norm socialization, in terms of the laws of the state, but also in terms of international law. Zimbabwe is a member of the United Nations, and Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Rights gives us these rights. Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights gives us the right to freedom of expression. But also the Declaration of Freedom of Expression in Africa, or what is called the Bantu Declaration, from Article 1 up to Article 9, we have these freedoms. But more to it, the Windhoek Declaration of promoting an independent and pluralistic African press gives us these rights. So the rights we are talking about are not simply in the Constitution of the Republic of Zimbabwe, but are also in international statutes on human rights law, but also in African statutes, to which Zimbabwe is a member of the African Union, and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, Section 9, gives us these rights. We have to exercise these rights within the confines of both domestic law and international law, including the government. The government is the big brother. Lead by example. You cannot have a government that says we don't want incitement of violence. You have a lawyer, a former minister, who goes to incite violence on television, and this is not a lie. It's all over. It's it's international now. What former Minister Chinamaza did, and it is not allowed with the behavior of a failure. Because if citizens copy what Chinamaza does, we encourage lawlessness and anarchy in the country. And as citizens, we must be responsible to make sure that there's law and order in our country, to make sure that there's racial harmony, there's ethnic violence, harmony, there's tribal harmony, there's coexistence among our people. By not drinking from the same cup of evil and violence that the former Minister Chinamasa was inciting people. Zimbabweans must be orderly. They must shame the devil and exercise violence and not exercise freedom of expression that violates the provisions of the Constitution.
Right, Dr. Ruhanya, last week we saw the appointment of Zimbabwe Media Commission, commissioners taking office there. What is the role of the Zimbabwe Media Commission in Zimbabwe in terms of looking at the media freedoms in Zimbabwe? Also, we have a PAC, Presidential Advisory Council, which is a media advisor, Trevor Ngube. What is the role of a media advisor in the PAC as well? What's the role of the Zimbabwe Media Commission in Zimbabwe?
It's clear the role of the Zimbabwe Media Commission is a constitutional role. They play a constitutional oversight on the exercise of the freedom of expression and freedom of the media, to make sure that we have legislation that implements the spirit and provisions of the Constitution. So its role is an oversight role, to make sure that there's freedom of expression, for instance, to make sure that the provisions of the laws related to freedom of expression are implemented, that we have a free media in Zimbabwe, we have a democratic media in Zimbabwe. That's why the Zimbabwe Media Commission falls under what are called Chapter 12, that is constitutional bodies that support democracy. So its role is to support democracy in Zimbabwe relative to the exercise of freedom of expression. It must make sure that there is media diversity. It must make sure that there is liberalization of the airwaves. It must make sure that there is no polarization in the media. It must make sure that freedom of expression as enshrined in the Constitution is upheld. That is their role, non-partisan. That is why it is part of the Chapter 12 institutions supporting democracy. And the media and democracy have a strong interplay. You cannot have a democratic state without a democratic media, or a democratic media in a democratic state. It is not possible.
And the role of media advisor in PAC?
Is to advise the leadership. They were, I don't know the remit of how they are supposed to operate, but coming from the media, they should, I think, advise the leadership of the state, that is the president, on what is right and what is wrong, and how a pluralistic media ought to operate given their experience. This Trevor Ngube, with respect, I have a lot of respect for him, and I know he's a very good man. And I know that he is doing his best to advise. Whether the advice is taken or is not taken is another thing. But he has a history of fighting for freedom of expression that cannot be disputed by anyone. Facing arrest as far back as 1994, when he wrote the story about Mugabe sweating to former First Lady Grace. He was incarcerated, he was arrested several times. He runs a very professional and robust media institution in Alpha Media Holdings that has done a lot of work in advancing democratic freedoms, in advancing human rights, in assisting the state to build a culture of human rights. So Mr. Ngube, for me, he's a big man. He's someone, when I read about him, when I say him, he's someone that I hold in very, very, very high esteem. And I know he's doing the right thing. Whether what he tells the president is implemented or not is another thing. But I know, even in my sleep, that he is doing the right things. But he ultimately, the buck does not stop with Mr. Ngube. It stops way. And it is up to those who are given advice to implement it or not to implement it. But you can see from the papers, the Standard, the Newsday, the Independent, fantastic newspapers that have assisted in the democratization of the polity for a very long time. When it was very difficult in the 90s, they were there even before he started his newspapers. He's a senior journalist. We look up to him.
Doc, earlier this year, I sat down with Professor Welshman to talk more about the Constitution of Zimbabwe. One of the key issues that we spoke about was the amendment of the Constitution. He said in 2013, when this thing was there was a semblance of unity in Zimbabwe, and the COPAC went far and wide to consult people about the Constitution amendment. But now in 2020, we're amending the Constitution when there's no unity in Zimbabwe. People are hungry, people are poor, people are looking for jobs, and we are amending the Constitution. Why are we making now for earnings to those of why are we amending the Constitution?
No, I think it's clear what is happening is the authoritarian consolidation. I think after the overthrow of Mugabe, President Mnangagwa is trying to consolidate his power. But he is consolidating his power in the wrong way. It is not desirable to concentrate power in one office. We cannot create an imperial president because at the core of our problems is an executive that is answerable to itself. That is not even answerable to the people. It says it was elected by the people, given. But how do you account for those people? The executive in Zimbabwe, particularly the president, doesn't go to parliament to answer to the views, the concerns of the public through their representatives. So the president in Zimbabwe, the president, not the person, but the office, is like a monarch. Is answerable to its family, to its friends, and not to the people that it says it elected them. So, and also in terms of what Zimbabwe is going through, we need to understand what is the question at this historic moment. Zimbabwe has been facing a lot of questions. I can take you shortly. In the 1890s, we had the question of land disposition. The 1890 to 1893 Anglo-Ndebele War was about land disposition. And the Ndebele rose against the colonial masters because they were dispossessed of their land. In 1896 to 1897, we had the Ndebele Shona uprising. Against what was the question? The question was land dispossession. That was the question at that particular time. We come to the 1960s. We had the question of independence. Zimbabweans in ZAPU, in ZANU, in NDP, the likes of Ngomo, Chitepo, and others went to war because we wanted decolonization and the independence. That was the question. Everything else came, but that was the question. In 1980, we had the question of development, but there is when the problem started. While these were supposed to unite our people to develop the state, others started Kugrawundi, betraying their own brothers and sisters that they went to war. You must remember that in 1980, when Zimbabwe came for independence, the most senior politician in this land between the Zambezi and the Limpopo was Joshua Ngomo. Mugabe was actually publicity secretary in ZAP under Joshua Ngomo. All these people were juniors to Ngomo, they said under Ngomo, but they betrayed him. That is when we started the problem of people who have no fidelity to the truth. We have no fidelity to their seniors. Then they started, Ngomo is the father of dissidents. What Chinamasa is saying. How can Ngomo, who was the leader of the ANC, who was the leader of the NDP, who was the leader of ZAPU, ZANU broke from ZAPU, by the way. They were all under Ngomo, now, but they were now neighboring some other time. Now he is dead, they're now saying, they're trying to rewrite history, which everyone knows. In 1980, instead of developing the state together as Zanla and Zipra, as Zampu and Zam, they started fighting each other. That was the question. Then as of 2008 years ago, we started having the problem, the question of democratization, human rights, because ZANU was now abusing human rights, there were cases of corruption. But at this moment, what is the Zimbabwe question? The Zimbabwe question at this moment is not the constitution that he must give the president more powers. The Zimbabwe question, which cuts across non-partisan land, is the question of livelihood. We are swimming in poverty. Whether you are ZANU, MDC, Ndonga, or you come from wherever, we need food on the table. We need medicine. We need school fees. But most fundamental, we need law and order in our country. The constitution must be respected. So we have a dual crisis, a political and economic crisis happening simultaneously at the same time in an informalized economy where livelihoods become the fundamental question for everyone. So that is the question. The question is not about new laws to give the president more powers. No, that is not the question. So it is the role of the state to protect its own citizens. It is the role of the state to provide an environment for enterprise, for business to thrive, not to ban eco-cash. When you ban eco-cash, you are saying in the midst of coronavirus, the COVID-19, we need eco-cash to transact without holding money. But you are now going for them. If there are issues, are there no better ways of addressing those issues? Because we are not also trying to say that there's any entity that is above the law, but the state has the capacity to rein in those people. We have a currency that is not working. Even those that are saying we should use the Zimbabwe dollar, if you go to all those cabinet ministers, find them with the US dollar, with some president of another country, politician at a note in their pockets, but they lie that the Zimbabwe dollar is working. Working where? It has lost value. Dollarize, make people live, address the fundamental economic question. Then when the macroeconomic fundamentals are in charge, remove it and put our own dollar. We don't even want to use foreign currency. We want our own currency, but at the right time, when the fundamentals are in place.
I talk, we always hear that Zimbabwean constitution. We always hear that Zimbabwean constitution is a rich document full of great content. But however, Doc, is there constitutionalism in the constitution of Zimbabwe?
We have a constitution without constitutionalism. To use the Dr. Magaisa term, we have a constitution without constitutionalism. Because constitutionalism is beyond legality. It has to do with the respect for human rights. It has to do with your political culture, your capacity to, in a country where there are abductions, you cannot talk of constitutionalism. If indeed we have abductions, what is the problem with the state arresting those abductors? Why are these abductors not arrested? I don't know who these abductors are, but what I know is that we have a very competent security apparatus in this country. Wait, if our security apparatus are not interfered by politicians, commit a crime and see how swiftly they will get you. There are professionals, but unfortunately that are compromised by politicians. If there are people who abduct people, surely the security apparatus of this country have a capacity. Don't they have underestimate their capacity to apprehend? If you go to the rural areas and there's a major case there, where politicians are not invited, are not involved. I have not seen a major case where politicians are not involved, which can last for 24 hours without the security apparatus of this country upholding or apprehending the culprit. So let's have law and order. Okay, we have, like I said, we have a constitution without constitutionality. That is Magaisa 2008. He wrote a very articulated article on constitution without constitutionalism. There are certain things that are not necessarily legal. That our conduct, our political practice, our political values, our values as a nation, to know that there is no crime in having an MDC as a political party, ZANU as a political party, Ndonga as a political party. But the moment you say another political party, a player, is a terrorist organization, that's constitution without constitutionalism. Where is the constitutionalism with that kind of job from a lawyer like Minister Chiramas? It's below the bar.
Okay, so as we wrap up our conversation, what is in your heart when it comes to Zimbabwean constitution as well as democracy? What is in your heart with democracy as well as constitution of Zimbabwe?
This country, we only have one country. And the country we have is Zimbabwe. We all wish the best for our country, for our children, for our relatives, from Zambezi to Limpopo. My wish is that We want to stand up high with our compatriots from other nations. Let's return the country to democratic legitimacy. No one should be above the law, including myself. I must not be above the law. Everyone must be guided. We want to have supremacy of the law in politics. Our conduct must be subjected to the supremacy of the rule of law. So the rule of law must be supreme to the rule of men. We are tired of the rule of men and the rule of women. We want the rule of law, not the rule of men. That is at my heart. Where everyone is above the law, where everyone is below the law, where no one is above the law. Subject ourselves to the Constitution. And the Constitution must be upheld in non-partisan ways. In my heart, I want to see progress in my country. I want the economy of our country to thrive. I want to go to Bulawayo, go to Zaka without having problems of fuel and without being harassed by police in the process of my travel. So one law and order. And this is not foreign. This is not British sponsored. This is not American sponsored. This is what Mangena, the likes of Masuku, the likes of Chongogara, the likes of Ziapapa, the likes of these people, but we're saying in the 1960s. We're not saying anything new. We're actually talking the 1960s discourse. The liberation discourse is what we're talking about. And those liberators were not sent by foreigners to say that we want our rights to be protected, we want the rule of law. Chitepo was not sent by a foreigner. Ngomo was not sent by a foreigner. Ziapapa, Mangena, Chitepo, and all those people. But they were sent by the idea that we want a prosperous Zimbabwe. This is all we want. Nothing more, nothing less.
Doc, thank you so much today on the show.
You're welcome.
Right there, you have it. This has been Know Your Right, a show that seeks to look at the Zimbabwean Constitution as well as the Bill of Rights. My name is Brighton Ngube. This is Asake Online. Today on the show, joined by Dr. Pedzisai Ruhanya, Media Freedoms in Mars Corporation. Till next time, do follow us on Twitter at ScienceZW. Do follow me on Twitter at The Real Factor. Do follow on Twitter at Pedzisai Ruhanya. And next time, I say, and stay at home. If you don't go to the public, stay at home, sanitize, and wear your mask all the time. Because #Asake.